passing, south to north, at this time on Al Jazeera.
The deaths of 23 Indian children due to food laced with poison raises serious questions about a government program that feeds 120 million school kids a day. Negligence or a murder conspiracy? 101 East investigates at this time on Al Jazeera.
It's good to have you with us. These are the top stories on Al Jazeera. Al Jazeera's correspondent inside Aleppo says more than 120 people have been killed and 300 injured in the latest air raids. The Syrian military is being accused of dropping barrels filled with explosives on people. An Israeli soldier has been killed near the border with Lebanon. Israel says the soldier was shot by a Lebanese army sniper. It happened near the town of Rosh Hanikra. And Chile's first female president, Michelle Bachelet, is to take office for the second time. The socialist leader won more than 60% of the vote in a runoff election. She beat conservative candidate Evelyn Matei. Let's get more now on the attack in the Syrian city of Aleppo. Activists say so-called barrel bombs were used. Let's take a look now at these. They're usually made from something like pipe artillery shells or oil drums. They're then filled with explosives, for example, TNT, some oil and shrapnel. This can include nails and bolts. And the bombs are usually dropped by helicopters. With us now from Dubai is Greg Ohannessian. He's the Defence Project Manager at INEGMA. That's a company specialising in defence and space issues. It's very good to have you with us on Al Jazeera. What do you make of these reports of barrel bombs being used at this stage of the conflict?
Thanks for having me, Liz. I think it's an interesting time for the Syrian army to be using barrel bombs in Aleppo. It seems as though things had calmed down for a few months. If you remember, barrel bombs were actually used on a much smaller scale in August, again on the outskirts of Aleppo. So this is actually, it seems to be a common theme in Aleppo, especially with the Syrian army. There are two possible scenarios as to why they're used this time. It seems as though it can be used ahead of a much larger ground offensive, or it could be used as a way to contain opposition forces that are pushing out into the outskirts of Aleppo. So it's tough to say, but what's obvious is the absolutely destructive force that these barrel bombs have. They're not used for destroying military hardware. They're not particularly effective against fortified areas. They're filled with pieces of rebar, large pieces of bolts, shrapnel, anything that can cause significant damage to humans. I mean, that's the simple point of the use of these bombs.
And how do we know that, or do we know that the Syrian regime is behind it?
There are several videos, again, from the bombings in August as well, where you see Mi-25 helicopters, which are used by the Syrian army. There are also some reports on yesterday's attack that MiG fighters were actually used as well. There are 3 separate videos available online that showed the possibility of a MiG fighter being supporting the helicopters in this attack.
And just lastly, why do you think that the Syrian regime would use these these seemingly sort of do-it-yourself, DIY explosive devices?
Absolutely, they are improvised devices. They've been used before in this uprising, and they were also used in 1982 in Hama against the Muslim Brotherhood. So this is something that's been used for some time by the Syrian army. It's sort of within their tactics and procedures. But there's the potential that the forces the Syrian forces in Tel Sharab and around Safira, they could potentially be cut off and unable to acquire more conventional ordnance. But I believe that it's fundamentally the psychological factor, the destructive force of these devices is so great, especially when dropped on areas in markets, in very civilian areas. The destructive force is very powerful and will have a strong psychological impact on the civilian.
Thank you very much for your
civilians in Aleppo.
Thank you for your insights, Greg. That's Greg Ohannessian joining us from Dubai.
Thank you, Liz.
Now, the Iranian government says it doesn't know the whereabouts of a US citizen who went missing in Iran 7 years ago. Last week, there were reports that Robert Levinson was on an unauthorized mission for the CIA. It's been reported the spy agency paid his family more than $2.5 million to keep quiet. Relatives say not enough is being done to find him, but the US government says that's not the case.
There hasn't been progress in the sense that we don't have him back, but to suggest that we've abandoned him or anybody has abandoned him is simply incorrect and not helpful. The fact is that I have personally raised the issue.
But we know that he is not incarcerated in Iran.
How do you know that?
If he is, he's not incarcerated by the government, and I believe the government runs a pretty much good control of the country. If we can trace him and find him, we will certainly discuss this.
So it is possible?
Everything is possible. But I'm saying that we have no trace of him in Iran.
Now, people have started to gather in the Indian capital, New Delhi, on the first anniversary of the gang rape and murder of a student. The killing caused outrage and prompted the Indian government to introduce tougher laws against rape. Karishma Vyas is live for us in New Delhi. So, Karishma, 1 year later, is New Delhi, is the Indian capital, any safer for Indian women?
Well, that's the question that everybody is asking today. If you remember, when the crime first occurred on the 16th of December last year, there were massive street protests, not just here in the capital in Delhi, but across the country. And it really was an outpouring of anger and frustration from the public at the perceived apathy of the political class, of political leaders towards crimes against women. There was also a perception that the judiciary and the police didn't take these crimes seriously at all. Now, a year on, the government has taken a number of measures to address these concerns. 6 fast-track courts have been set up here in the capital to deal exclusively with sex crimes committed. The government is hoping that this will at least give the police and the judiciary more credibility. Laws have also been amended. Offences like stalking and voyeurism have been marked as crimes for the first time in India. Punishments for other crimes against women have also been increased. Acid attacks, for example, now carry a minimum sentence of 10 years. The sentence was much lighter previously. Now, women's groups have welcomed all of these moves, but they say that they do not go far enough. Marital rape, for example, is still not considered a crime in this country. So activists say India still has a long way to go for its women to feel safe in this country.
Absolutely, Karishma. And what's going on behind you there? Obviously, people are marking the 1 year since that incident. What's going on there, and what's being done to raise people's awareness around rape?
Well, today there is a number of activities, a number of protests planned across the city. We are at a location called Jantar Mandar in the capital, and we're expecting people are trickling in right now. You can see behind me, activists have already started addressing the crowd of probably about 100 to 200 people have gathered right now. We're expecting that to increase dramatically as the day goes on. You can see a massive poster behind me, and it's actually a map of India. and under the name of each state is the number of rapes that were reported in 2012. Here in Delhi in 2012, 706 rapes were reported last year. This has risen dramatically in 2013, more than 1,300